Hello, my name is Margaret. I'm 64 years old, and that day I just wanted to do something sweet for my husband. I decided to surprise him at his office with his favorite lunch. As I reached the building, there was a sign at the entrance that said authorized personnel only. I smiled at the guard and said proudly, "It's okay, I'm the CEO's wife." He gave me a strange look, then chuckled softly. "Ma'am," he said, "I see his wife every day. There she is, coming out right now." I turned toward the doors, and in that instant, my whole body went cold. A beautiful young woman stepped out, holding my husband's hand. But I didn't move. I kept my smile because sometimes the calmest moments hide the deepest storms. What happened next would change everything I believed about love, loyalty, and the woman I thought I was. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages and discovering where you are. Now let's uncover how this story really began. I woke up that morning feeling lighter than I had in years. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without pain. My body no longer felt like a fragile cage. I moved through the house in quiet triumph, each step a small victory after years of weakness and stillness. Today wasn't just another day. It was proof that I had survived. The idea came to me while I was making breakfast. I would surprise Connor at his office. After all those years, he'd worked so hard while I lay in bed, too sick to be his companion. I wanted to show him that his wife was back, the woman he'd promised to love in sickness and in health. I wanted to bring him lunch, homemade, just like I used to before everything changed. Maybe it was foolish, but I wanted to see his eyes light up again. I packed the meal with care, folding the napkins as if that simple act could hold the years we'd lost. I even wore the blue dress he once said made me look like the ocean on a calm day. My reflection in the mirror startled me. A few silver strands threaded through my hair, faint lines around my mouth. But my eyes, though older, held a spark that had been missing for too long. As I drove toward his office, I hummed along to the radio, nervous and excited. The city blurred past, familiar yet distant, like a dream I was just waking into. When I pulled up to the building's sleek glass and steel, I hesitated. I had never been here before. He'd always said the environment was too stressful for me, full of meetings and egos. I used to accept that explanation without question. Inside the lobby, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished floors. The receptionist barely looked up as I approached, her expression polite but indifferent. "Good morning," I said softly. "I'm here to see Mr. Connor Weiss." She smiled automatically. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" I laughed lightly. "No appointment. I'm his wife. I just wanted to surprise him." Her smile froze for half a second, confusion flickering behind her eyes before she replied, "Oh, of course. You'll need to check with security first." At the entrance to the executive wing, a sign read, "Authorized personnel only." A uniformed guard leaned casually against the wall, scrolling through his phone. I clutched the lunch basket a little tighter and walked up to him. "I'm the CEO's wife," I said, smiling as confidently as I could. My voice trembled just slightly on the last word. He looked up, friendly but uncertain. "The CEO's wife?" He chuckled softly, as if I'd made a joke. "Ma'am, I see his wife all the time." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I'm sure you do," I said, forcing a smile. "Then you'll know me." He tilted his head toward the glass doors. "Actually," he said slowly, "there she is now." I turned. A young woman in a cream-colored suit was stepping out of the elevator, holding a designer purse and laughing at something on her phone. She was beautiful, glossy hair, perfect posture, confidence that came from being seen. And then Connor appeared beside her, hand resting casually on her back. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, then her lips. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The sounds of the lobby faded, replaced by a ringing in my ears. I wanted to scream, to run, to crumble into the floor. But instinct, perhaps the same one that had carried me through the years of sickness, made me stand perfectly still. I smiled faintly, as though I'd simply forgotten where I was supposed to be, turned to the guard, and said in a shaky whisper, "Thank you. I must have made a mistake." I walked briskly toward the parking lot, my heartbeat thundering in my chest. My hands trembled so violently that the lunch basket slipped, tumbling open across the asphalt. The glass container shattered, and the food I'd made with such love spilled into the dirt. I stared at it for a long time before gathering it up mechanically, piece by piece, as if cleaning it could somehow fix what had broken inside me. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, watching through the windshield as the woman, his wife, the guard had said, slid into a black Mercedes parked near the front. I leaned forward, breath caught in my throat. There was a child's car seat in the back. The image seared itself into my mind, more painful than anything I'd endured during my illness. I thought of the nights Connor had stayed late at work, the phone calls he'd taken in another room, the sudden trips he'd claimed were emergencies. I remembered his tenderness when he brushed my hair from my face, his sighs of exhaustion, his insistence that I rest and not worry about the world outside. It all shifted, twisted into something unrecognizable. But beneath the waves of shock, a strange calm began to form. My body, though trembling, felt anchored in a cold clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't weak anymore. I had survived worse things than betrayal. I had survived my own body turning against me. I could survive this. I watched as Connor kissed her again, a gesture so casual, so practiced, it made me sick. The younger woman drove off, unaware of the storm she'd left behind. Connor straightened his tie and turned back toward the building, his face composed, confident, the mask of a man who believed he had control over everything and everyone. But he didn't know that I had seen. I sat there, staring at the mirrored facade of his office tower. For years, I'd imagined those walls hiding ambition, power, a husband providing for us both. Now, they looked like a stage set, thin and false, ready to collapse with a single push. A lifetime of trust cracked open, but beneath it, something fierce began to stir. My hands steadied on the wheel. My reflection in the glass showed not a broken woman, but someone newly awake. I didn't know yet what I would do, only that this would not end with silence. Not this time. The lunch basket sat beside me, empty now, just like the years I'd spent believing in a lie. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, a promise more than a thought. He thinks I'm weak. He has no idea who I've become, and as the engine hummed to life, I felt the faintest trace of a smile forming, not of happiness, but of something deeper. Resolve. The perfect lie had finally begun to crumble. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt foreign, too quiet, too neat, like a museum of a life that had never been real. The scent of Connor's cologne lingered faintly in the hallway, and it made me nauseous. I sat in the living room with the lights off, the city a distant shimmer through the curtains, and tried to piece together what I had seen. Every memory began to rearrange itself. Every late night, every business trip, every gentle lie disguised as concern. At some point between midnight and dawn, I picked up my phone and scrolled to Sarah's number. My niece had always been the brave one in the family, sharp, intuitive, unwilling to accept appearances at face value. She worked as a private investigator now, a job my sister once said was too dangerous for a young woman. But Sarah thrived in danger. She found clarity in truth. When she answered, her voice was groggy but warm. "Aunt Margaret? Is everything all right?" I swallowed hard. "No," I said softly. "And you can't tell anyone what I'm about to say." By the time the sun rose, Sarah was at my door, hair pulled back, notepad in hand. I could see her expression shift as I told her everything. The surprise visit, the younger woman, the kiss, the child's car seat. She didn't interrupt once, but her eyes darkened. "Do you want me to find out who she is?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And Sarah, this stays between us. No one else. Not even your mother." She nodded. "You have my word." For the next 3 days, the house became my waiting room. I moved through it like a ghost, pretending to live while my mind circled the same questions. Who was she? How long had this gone on? What kind of man builds 2 lives and sleeps soundly beside both? On the 4th evening, Sarah came back with her findings. Her face told me everything before she spoke. She sat beside me on the couch, placed a folder on the coffee table, and took my hand. "Her name is Victoria Weiss," she said gently. "She's 38. She and Connor have been legally married for 3 years. The words didn't land right away. They hovered in the air between us, ungraspable. When they finally sank in, the world seemed to tilt again, just like it had in that office lobby. "Married?" I whispered. "Legally?" Sarah nodded. I checked twice. "They live in Brookhaven, about 40 minutes away. Small house, quiet neighborhood. She runs a boutique and—" She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the folder. "And what?" "She has a daughter, 3 years old. Her name is Emma." I stared at the wall, hearing the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. 3 years old. That would have been the year I got sick, the year I thought I was dying, and he held my hand and told me I was the only thing that mattered. I rose slowly, pacing the room. "So while I was fighting for my life," I said, my voice shaking, "he was building a new one." Sarah didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She opened the folder and showed me photos. Connor with Victoria at a park, holding the little girl. The child had his eyes. I had always imagined those eyes on the children we never had. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor. Sarah moved to comfort me, but I held up a trembling hand. "Don't," I whispered. "I need to feel this." The tears didn't come. My eyes burned, but they stayed dry. Maybe grief had already emptied me years ago when my body turned against me. Now, all that was left was a hollow ache and something new stirring beneath it. That night, after Sarah left, I went to Connor's study. I opened every drawer, every cabinet. The house was too perfect, his secrets too carefully arranged. But habits leave traces, and Connor's greatest flaw had always been arrogance. He believed himself untouchable. It was in his golf bag that I found it, a second phone, tucked deep in a side pocket. My breath caught as I turned it on. It was password protected, but the code came to me easily. He always used the same numbers, our wedding date. Messages flooded the screen. I scrolled through them with shaking hands. "Good night, darling. Emma said she misses you. I can't wait for our trip next weekend. I love you, my husband." I stared at those words until they blurred. My husband? One photo showed Connor holding the little girl, her face pressed to his shoulder, his expression soft and tender. It was the same look he used to give me when I was too weak to get out of bed. The betrayal wasn't just physical, that was spiritual. He had recycled my suffering, my vulnerability, into a story that made him heroic in someone else's life. At one point, I whispered aloud, "How could you?" But the house didn't answer. Only silence filled the space where love used to live. I sat on the floor until dawn, the phone heavy in my lap, my heart heavy in my chest. I should have cried, screamed, broken something. But instead, I started thinking, planning. Because in that moment, I understood something profound. Weakness and stillness are not the same. I had been still for years, but never weak. When Sarah came back the next day, I showed her the phone. "He used my illness," I said. "He told people I needed peace, privacy, rest. That's how he kept us separate. He built an entire second world while I was fading in this one. Sarah clenched her jaw. He's a monster. No, I said softly. He's worse than that. Monsters show their teeth. He wore kindness like armor. She nodded, her eyes shining with quiet fury. There's more, she said, pulling another folder from her bag. I traced the money from your father's trust fund, the one meant for your care. He's been funneling it into Victoria's accounts. Luxury expenses, travel, jewelry, even tuition payments for her boutique's expansion. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My inheritance? All of it. Something inside me broke, but not the way he expected. It wasn't despair this time, it was resolve. I thought of the years I spent begging insurance companies, rationing medication, worrying about bills while he comforted me with words like, "We'll manage, sweetheart." I looked at Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. He took everything. She reached for my hand. No, not everything. He doesn't have you anymore. That sentence, simple as it was, struck something deep within me. Because she was right. He had stolen money, time, trust, but the part of me that survived disease and loneliness, that quiet ember that refused to go out, was still mine. I stood and walked to the window. Morning light touched the garden where I had once sat for hours, too weak to stand. Now, I felt something rising through me against strength, sharp and trembling, but alive. Then we start there, I said. We find every lie, every stolen cent, every piece of truth he buried. I want to know everything. Sarah smiled faintly, determination in her eyes. Then we'll give him nowhere to hide. As she packed her files, I felt the smallest flicker of peace. Not the peace of ignorance, the peace of purpose. I wasn't the same woman who had driven to his office with homemade lunch and hope in her hands. That woman was gone, and in her place stood someone new, forged in silence and betrayal. And as I closed the folder and met Sarah's steady gaze, I realized something else. Sometimes, the first step toward healing isn't forgiveness. It's exposure. It's naming the darkness and daring it to face the light. That was the night I decided I would not just survive this. I would reclaim everything he had stolen, starting with myself. The book club was never supposed to be anything more than an evening of tea and escape and hour where we pretended the world could be folded into the pages of someone else's life. Ruth had been my anchor for decades. She arrived each Wednesday with the same shawl and the same laugh that could smooth the rough edges of my day. That week, the room felt smaller than usual, the books and pastries blurred at the edges. Because I carried a secret inside me that made everything heavy. I told her the story because secrets are a poor fit for loneliness, and because Ruth had a way of turning panic into plan with a single, steady look. She listened the way she always had, hands folded, eyes attentive, breath catching at the honest places. When I finished, when the memory of Connor's kiss in the lobby left yet another bitter aftertaste, Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was warm and ordinary, the sort of comfort that had nothing to do with grand gestures and everything to do with being present. "Oh, Margaret," she said, voice soft enough not to wake a sleeping child. "You mustn't go through this alone." "I can't," I admitted. "I don't know what to do. I feel hollow and furious all at once. I don't even know where to start." Ruth's eyes narrowed with that particular spark she always had when she decided to help. "My daughter, Jessica, she's a lawyer. She handled a case not long ago, something similar. Maybe not exactly the same, but enough that she'll know what to look for." I let the name hang there like a lifeline. "Will she help?" "She want to," Ruth said. "She hates injustice like the rest of us hate cold porridge." We went to Ruth's house that afternoon because it felt safer than the fluorescent office where secrets could slip away. Ruth brewed tea and fussed over details like she used to fuss over my hair when we were girls. Her daughter Jessica arrived with a file folder and a practical, efficient energy. She was younger than me, yes, sharp, and wore suits that made her look like a woman who belonged in courtrooms and conference rooms. But when she looked at me, her face softened. "You don't have to explain everything," Jessica said, setting the folder down gently. "Start from the beginning and we'll fill in what we need." So I told her. I told her about the surprise, the guard's comment, the younger woman, the car seat. I told her about the phone in Connor's golf bag and the messages that read like a second life. I told her about the hollow I felt where trust used to be. Jessica took notes, but more importantly, she asked the kinds of questions that cut to the heart of what mattered. Timelines, documents, access. "We have to be methodical," she said. "If we're going to confront him, we need to show more than emotion. We need evidence that stands up." Her words were clinical, yes, but they had warmth tucked inside, an insistence that truth deserved a spotlight. "Gathering evidence," I repeated, tasting the phrase like a new medicine. It sounded like power. Over the next days, my life narrowed into a series of small, deliberate actions. Where before my world had been measured in hospital visits and slow recoveries, now it was measured in receipts, bank statements, and quiet conversations whispered in Ruth's kitchen. Jessica taught me how to read ledgers the way a gardener learns to read soil, by looking for the little inconsistencies, the roots that didn't belong. I learned to be a different kind of patient, one who waited, not because she had no energy, but because she planned each move with care. Sarah, my niece, kept feeding me fragments she found, wire transfers to accounts I'd never seen, payments labeled as consulting fees that matched flights and purchases for places I'd never visited. It was like watching a tapestry unravel. Thread by thread, his careful story fell apart. One afternoon, Jessica sat me down with a folder that made my hands go cold. "We've traced transactions from your father's trust," she said quietly. "Large sums moving through shell accounts and into apparently personal expenses. Jewelry, luxury vacations, payments to a boutique. We've got dates, payees, and a paper trail that links back to Connor." My first reaction was a strange, small laugh, one of disbelief and anger tangled together. The trust fund had been my safety net, the money left to me to ensure I had what I needed if life's blows came. I had always intended to use it responsibly, for care and comfort. I had not imagined it becoming someone else's secret currency. "How could he?" I whispered. The question was fragile as glass. Jessica's eyes were firm. "Men like him don't see people. They see assets. He's been hiding expenses as business costs and siphoning funds while blaming your medical bills. It's deliberate, and it's been going on for years." I felt a cold wash of shame briefly. Shame that I had been blind. Shame that illness had left me exposed. But beneath that was a slow, swelling fury that began to feel less like poison and more like gasoline for a controlled burn. If he had been clever enough to hide bank accounts, then we would be cleverer still. We kept digging. Ruth found records buried in old emails, receipts that betrayed themselves by being written in haste. Sarah used her contacts to get court records and property deeds. Jessica organized everything into neat stacks, annotating each item with the date it was discovered and the path it had taken. The evidence mounted, and with every page, the picture of Connor grew less handsome and more monstrous in the way small cruelties often become when seen closely. Then came the thing that made my face go hot and cold in equal measure. Jessica handed me a file containing voice transcripts, overheard conversations from a business dinner where Connor had been careless. He had spoken about us with a cruelty wrapped in practicality, as if emotion were a business expense to be itemized and discarded. After the party, I'll file. One fragment read: "Margaret will be too humiliated to fight, and she's still weak." I read those lines and felt my blood run slick and bright. The sentence settled inside me like a tooth gone rotten, hurtful, sharp, and undeniable. He had a plan to discard me openly, timing his betrayal for our anniversary, when he assumed grief and shock would paralyze me. For a moment, I saw myself as he did, fragile, humiliated, an image he could step over. My first instinct was a creature of the heart rage that wanted to lash out immediately, to crumble his world in equal measure. But beneath it, trained by illness to survive measured strategies, I found a different impulse. Clarity. If he planned to use our anniversary as his curtain call, then I would take that stage. If he intended to humiliate me in front of the people who had known me, then I would turn that humiliation into exposure. I pictured the ballroom at the Four Seasons, the chandeliers, the murmurs, the faces that had applauded us for a life together. I imagined those same faces watching the truth unfurl like a banner. Jessica watched me, reading the storm in my face. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "We'll be with you. We'll gather everything and make it impossible for him to deny." Ruth squeezed my hand as if to anchor me to something real. "You deserve a different kind of celebration," she said. "One where you aren't erased." I saw the years of illness, the nights spent in sterile rooms listening to machines map my breath. I thought of the years of illness as how he had looked at me, eyes full of hope for my future. He had wanted me safe. He had wanted dignity in my later years. Connor had stolen that dignity as if it were only paper. There is a peculiar grief when someone steals what you believed was your future. It is not loud. It is a quiet bleeding. But grief can be an engine for change when paired with resolve. I felt something ignite deep inside me, a fierce, disciplined fire that did not seek to destroy for the sake of destruction, but to mend what had been torn. So I made my decision in that tidy living room, surrounded by pages and faces that wanted justice. I would not cower. I would not let him time his betrayal to the one night meant to celebrate 4 decades of marriage. I would use his own gathering, his pride, his network, his appetite for spectacle, as the place to reveal him. "It will be our stage," I told them, voice steady now, with a resolve that surprised even me, not his. Jessica smiled, a quick, professional smile of someone who had seen the law bend toward the truth, and Ruth cried quietly in relief and solidarity. Sarah, practical as ever, already had plans in motion. We would document, subpoena, and prepare. We would gather allies. We would make sure that every ledger, every text, and every lie had a place on the record. As I sat there, the gravity of what lay ahead settling around me like a cloak, I felt less like a victim and more like an instrument of my own life. The hurt would not be erased, but it could be transformed. I imagined standing in that ballroom, not as the frail woman he assumed I was, but as someone who had been refined by hardship and now stood ready to reclaim what was hers. There is a strange beauty in choosing to face what breaks you. It reshapes the pieces into something stronger. I breathed in, felt the steadiness that comes from purpose, and let myself imagine the night ahead, not as an end, but as the beginning of something fierce and true. I remember the moment everything shifted. Until that morning, I believed I was fighting a battle against one woman, a stranger who had stolen the life I'd built, the man I loved, the fragile dignity I still clung to. But the truth, when it arrived, came like a quiet earthquake. The kind that doesn't roar or warn, but rearranges the ground beneath your feet forever. Sarah came to my house early that day, her hair damp from rain, her expression unreadable. She held a folder pressed against her chest, and when she handed it to me, her hands were trembling. "Aunt Margaret," she said softly, "you need to see this." Inside were photographs of Victoria Weiss, 38 years old, married to Connor for 3 years. She looked radiant in every picture, not in a glamorous way, but with that peace women wear when they believe their lives are finally safe. There was a little girl in one of the photos, Emma, Connor's daughter, with her, a child with his eyes. My chest constricted so tightly I could barely breathe. But then Sarah said something that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Victoria doesn't know about you," she whispered. "She believes she's Connor's only wife." The room spun slowly, like I was trapped inside a carousel of disbelief. "That's impossible," I murmured. "She must know. How could she not?" Sarah slid another paper toward me, an old social media post, a mortgage record, snippets of text messages. All told the same story. To Victoria, Connor was a divorced businessman, a widower, even because apparently his ex-wife had died 3 years ago. 3 years ago. The very time I'd been in and out of hospitals, too weak to lift my head or question his late nights. He had declared me dead while I was still alive. I sat there for a long time, unable to speak. The clock ticked quietly in the corner, and each sound felt like a small betrayal, marking the time I'd lost to his lies. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory I had of Connor replayed in fragments, the way he used to hold my hand when my veins were bruised from IVs, the gentle kisses on my forehead, the soft lies about business meetings I never questioned. I thought I knew pain before, but this was something else. This was humiliation, compassion, fury, and grief melting into one. At dawn, I made a decision that felt both reckless and necessary. I went to the attic and pulled out a box of old photographs, our wedding day, the garden we built together, the house we renovated after my parents passed. Every image was proof that I existed, that our life had been real. I placed them carefully into a new box alongside a note written in trembling ink. "I'm not dead. You deserve to know the truth." Sarah helped me send it anonymously to Victoria's address. The act felt both terrifying and freeing. I imagined her opening the box, the disbelief, the cold rush of realization. Part of me pitied her, another part envied her innocence before this truth would strike. 3 days later, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I hesitated before answering. "Is this the woman in the photos?" The voice was fragile, uncertain. It trembled at the edges like something breaking. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm Margaret." A long pause followed, then the sound of someone breathing through tears. "He told me you were dead," Victoria whispered. "He said you died of cancer." "I was sick," I replied, "but I survived. I just didn't realize I was surviving for both of us." We agreed to meet the next morning. The cafe we chose was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place where secrets could breathe between the hiss of the espresso machine and the clinking of porcelain. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately, her posture, the way she scanned the room with caution and heartbreak. She looked nothing like the enemy I'd imagined. "Victoria?" I asked, standing halfway. "Margaret." She said my name like it carried both guilt and relief. We sat opposite each other, two women bound by the same man's lies. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Our eyes did the talking, hers full of confusion, mine full of sorrow. "I didn't know," she said finally. "He told me his wife had passed away. He even showed me an obituary clipping. My stomach turned. He forged that too?" She nodded. "He said he didn't want to talk about it, that it was too painful." I believed him. I studied her face, the faint lines of exhaustion, the faint hope still flickering beneath the wreckage. "You have a daughter," I said gently. "Emma." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "He's a good father," she murmured defensively, and then caught herself, shaking her head. Or at least I thought he was. It was strange how empathy bloomed between us instead of anger. We were both victims, but in that moment, we were also witnesses to each other's pain. "He's been living 2 lives," I said quietly. "Maybe more. And he's been taking everything from me, my inheritance, my dignity, my years." Victoria looked down at her coffee, then back up with trembling resolve. "Then let's find out what else he's hiding." Together, we compared bank statements, records, and emails. I had access to the accounts from my father's trust. She had the statements for the business Connor ran with her. It didn't take long before the pattern emerged: transfers, shell accounts, money disappearing into something called Gale Industries Holdings. Sarah joined us that evening at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd once served Connor homemade soup when I thought I was his whole world. "There's a third account," Sarah said, tracing the trail with her finger. "Neither of you are listed on it. It's offshore under an alias." "How much?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. 2.3 million. The number hung in the air like a ghost. Victoria pressed her palms to her face and began to sob quietly. I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt strange, comforting the woman my husband had deceived with. But in that touch, something shifted inside me. Compassion, solidarity, strength. "He thought he was playing two fragile women against each other," I said softly. "He didn't expect we'd find each other instead." Victoria looked up, eyes red but burning with new fire. "So what do we do now?" I breathed deeply, letting the rage and sorrow settle into something steadier. "Now," I said, "we make him face the truth. Every lie, every theft, every word." The three of us sat there in silence after that. Outside, the evening sky had turned indigo and rain traced long silver lines down the window. It struck me how strange it was that betrayal could create not just wounds, but also unlikely bonds. I wasn't the same woman who once believed silence would keep her safe. I was alive again, pulsing with purpose. And though my heart still ached, somewhere deep within it, a quiet promise began to grow. This story would not end in humiliation. It would end in truth. When betrayal has burned every illusion to ash, what remains is clarity. It doesn't arrive as a scream, but as a quiet, steady pulse beneath your ribs, reminding you that truth, once awakened, cannot be silenced again. That was what I felt in the days after Victoria and I decided to fight back. The grief was still there, sharp and raw. Underneath it, a strange calm began to take hold. I was no longer a woman stumbling through shock. I was a woman rebuilding herself from the ground up. Victoria came over almost every day after that first meeting. Sometimes we worked in silence, our laptops open on the dining table, the air thick with concentration. Sometimes we spoke in hushed voices, sharing fragments of memories that together drew the full outline of Connor's deceit. Sarah coordinated with Jessica, Ruth's daughter, who had agreed to take on our case quietly. Jessica's voice over the phone carried that perfect blend of compassion and steel. "You need to gather everything," she told me one evening. "Dates, transfers, text messages, voicemails, even receipts. Every lie leaves a trace. We'll build a web so tight he won't know where to move." Her words filled me with purpose. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I woke each morning with direction. I began opening drawers and boxes that I'd avoided during my illness, organizing years of records and correspondence. Every document told a story I had been too trusting to read before. Checks signed without explanation. Credit cards I never used. Transfers labeled as insurance reimbursements that had never reached me. Victoria, too, brought her evidence copies of contracts, shared bank accounts, correspondence where Connor used his charm like a weapon. Seeing it all together was dizzying. It was like laying out pieces of a broken mirror and realizing the reflection staring back was your life, just refracted and bleeding in all directions. Jessica arranged a private meeting with us one Sunday afternoon at her office. "What you're uncovering," she said, adjusting her glasses, "goes beyond infidelity. It's financial fraud, bigamy, and identity theft. He's living under multiple names across state lines. This isn't just betrayal, it's a crime." Her words felt like a verdict and a liberation all at once. I had spent so long wondering how I could have been so blind, how love could turn into poison so quietly. But now, the guilt that had anchored me for years began to dissolve. I hadn't been naive. I had been lied to by a master. And now that I could see the game, I could play it better. We began documenting everything meticulously. Every spreadsheet, every text message, every whispered confession. Sarah used encrypted drives to secure our data, labeling each folder with dates and cross-references. At night, when everyone else had gone home, I sat at my desk and listened to Connor's old voicemails. His voice still had that tender tone I'd once adored. He spoke of business trips and client dinners with that effortless sincerity I used to trust. Copied them all, saving every word like ammunition. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the collapse of his empire from within. I began reaching out discreetly to Connor's business partners, the men who'd once praised his charisma, his integrity. One by one, I discovered that he had deceived them too. During a meeting at the firm's downtown office, one of them, a tall man named Leonard, pulled me aside. "Margaret," he said cautiously, "I'm sorry for your illness. Connor always said the medical bills nearly bankrupted you both. He told us that's why the quarterly audits looked strange." I blinked, stunned. He blamed my illness? Leonard nodded. "He said he was covering your treatments out of pocket." We believed him. We had no reason not to. My hands trembled, but I managed a calm smile. "Thank you for telling me," I said. As I left the building, the autumn wind pressed against my face, cold and honest. It carried away the remnants of who I'd been, the woman who apologized for taking up space, for being sick, for trusting too much. That woman was gone. In the weeks that followed, I moved with quiet precision. My gentle demeanor, the one that once made people underestimate me, became my greatest shield. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I listened to Connor's stories about work stress as if they still mattered. But behind every smile was calculation. Years of illness had taught me how to survive quietly, how to observe without reacting. Now, that patience became my strength. Late one night, as he slept beside me, I turned to look at him. His face seemed peaceful, almost boyish in the dark. For a fleeting second, I remembered the man who had held my hand through chemotherapy, who had whispered that we'd grow old together. Then I remembered the offshore account, the forged obituary, the other woman raising his child. My love for him didn't die in a single moment. It unraveled slowly, thread by thread, until there was nothing left but the hollow shape of what used to be. It was then that I decided how this story would end. Not with shouting, not with scandal whispered behind closed doors, but with truth unveiled in the place where he believed himself untouchable. Our 40th anniversary was only a month away. Connor had already begun planning the celebration, insisting it be grand. "Something memorable," he said. The irony of that still makes me smile. He believed I wanted to honor his devotion, to thank him for standing by me through sickness and health. The reality would be far more memorable than he could ever imagine. "I was thinking the Four Seasons," he told me over dinner, his voice casual as he cut his steak. "It'll be elegant but intimate. Everyone from work will be there. Maybe even a few clients. You deserve it after everything you've been through." I stirred my wine slowly, letting my eyes meet his. "That sounds perfect, Connor," I said, my tone even. "You always know how to make people feel special." He smiled, that familiar smug curl of his lips. "You see? I told you I'd make it up to you." Later that night, when he went to bed, I emailed the event coordinator and secured the Four Seasons ballroom under my name. I expanded the guest list to include not only his friends and colleagues, but every business partner he had deceived, every investor he had manipulated, and, of course, Victoria and Jessica. As I finalized the list, I felt no tremor of fear, only the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for surviving. I had been silent too long, afraid of confrontation, of losing what little stability I had left. But when you lose everything, even dignity, you learn that fear has no power anymore. Connor, meanwhile, was radiant with anticipation. He moved around the house humming, making calls, giving instructions. "You've been through so much, Margaret," he told me one morning, kissing my forehead. "It makes me happy to see you excited again." I looked at him then, the man who had stolen years of my life, my father's legacy, and even my peace, and I smiled gently. "You have no idea how excited I am," I said. He laughed, oblivious. In the mirror behind him, I caught my own reflection. The woman staring back was older, yes, but her eyes had a fire I hadn't seen in years. A quiet storm was building inside me, gathering force in silence. And when it finally broke, it would wash every lie clean. In the weeks leading up to the anniversary, life at home became an exquisite performance. Each morning, I slipped into my role with the practiced ease of an actress who had learned to hide tremors beneath calm smiles. I laughed at Connor's jokes, asked about his meetings, and complimented the suit he wore to work. My gestures were measured, my tone light, my gaze steady. If he suspected anything, he never showed it. He believed, as always, in the illusion he had created, that I was grateful, docile, endlessly forgiving. But inside, a quiet storm swirled. Beneath the surface of domestic ease, another version of me existed, awake in the dark hours, fierce and unwavering. When Connor kissed my cheek goodnight and drifted to sleep, I would slip out of bed, wrap a shawl around my shoulders, and make my way to the study where my laptop waited like a silent accomplice. Victoria and I worked late into the night, our faces illuminated by the blue glow of our screens. We spoke in whispers, even though no one could hear us. Jessica would join our calls, her voice calm and composed as she guided us through the final steps. "You're not just exposing a man," she told us one night, her tone steady. "You're unveiling a system of deceit that thrived because you were too kind to question it." Those words stayed with me. Kindness had been my armor once, but I had learned how easily it could become a cage. I wasn't unkind now, but I had learned that love without boundaries is simply surrender. The documentary filmmaker, a woman named Ava, joined our secret alliance through Jessica's recommendation. Ava had worked on cases of financial and emotional abuse before, and she understood the delicate balance between justice and dignity. "You don't need to destroy him with rage," she said softly during our first meeting. "Truth alone will undo him." Her team helped us organize the presentation that would play at the anniversary gala. It wasn't just a compilation of evidence, it was a story. My story. Our story. The narrative of a man who had built a kingdom of lies on the suffering of those who trusted him most. I watched the footage evolve piece by piece. The photographs, the financial records, the recorded calls, even the video clips of me in the hospital during the years he claimed to be caring for me. Seeing it all together was both devastating and empowering. Every moment of my weakness was reframed as proof of my endurance. During the day, I balanced this secret life with the facade of a loving wife. Connor would come home boasting about deals, his voice rich with pride. "The anniversary's shaping up perfectly," he said one evening, sipping scotch in his armchair. "Everyone's excited to celebrate us." Us. The word felt like glass in my mouth. "That's wonderful, dear," I replied, folding laundry at the foot of the couch. "You deserve to be celebrated." He smiled, satisfied, and returned to his drink. He didn't notice how my hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I carried. Days passed in this strange duality. Outwardly, I was the devoted wife preparing for a grand event. Inwardly, I was orchestrating justice with the precision of a surgeon. There was something sacred about it, the quiet reclaiming of my voice, the transformation of pain into action. Then Lisa arrived. My daughter's presence changed everything. She flew in from Seattle after I finally told her the truth. When she stepped through the door, her eyes were wide with disbelief and fury. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "You're telling me he used your illness to fund his affair?" I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "It's worse than that, sweetheart. He built an entire second family while I was in bed fighting to stay alive." Lisa's hands balled into fists. "You can't go through with the party. You can't let him stand there and smile like he's some devoted husband." Her anger was beautiful in its purity, a fierce, protective energy I had forgotten the world could still hold for me. I took her hand gently. "Lisa, listen to me. This isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. I've lived in silence for too long. Justice needs witnesses." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're too forgiving, Mom." I smiled faintly. "Not forgiving, strategic." She hugged me then, long and hard, her face buried in my shoulder. For a moment, I let myself feel the comfort of being held, of being someone's mother again, rather than someone's victim. Over the next few days, Lisa became my quiet confidant. She helped me review details, organize files, and confirm arrangements with Ava's team. There were moments when I caught her looking at me with awe and sadness intertwined. "I can't believe you've been carrying all this alone," she said one night. "I had to," I answered softly. "You were building your life. I couldn't let my illness or his deceit take yours down too." Then came the call from Eleanor, Connor's mother. Her voice, warm and fragile, reached me one afternoon as I arranged the seating chart for the gala. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her tone full of affection, "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Planning such an elegant event despite your fragile health. It's inspiring. You're a saint, dear. Connor is so lucky to have you." I closed my eyes for a moment, gripping the edge of the table. Her words pierced deeper than I expected. I had loved Eleanor once like a second mother. She had baked pies for us during holidays, sent cards during my illness, always believing in the story her son had told her. "Thank you, Eleanor," I managed to say. "I'm doing my best." "I always knew you were strong," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. "You held this family together." After the call ended, I sat in silence. The guilt crept in quietly, like fog seeping under a door. Eleanor was innocent in all this. She didn't know that the son she adored had stolen not only my future, but also my dignity. I felt the sting of compassion for her, a mother about to watch her world collapse. But then I remembered the hospital nights, the bills piled on the kitchen counter, the loneliness of believing I was loved while he was living elsewhere, feeding another life with my inheritance. The guilt softened into resolve. Compassion would not stop me from doing what was right. Each night, as the countdown shortened, I found myself standing by the window after Connor went to sleep, watching the moon reflected in the glass. There was peace in that stillness. I realized that I was no longer the same woman who had clung to hope out of fear of loss. I had already lost everything that could be taken from me. What remained, my voice, my truth, my will, was mine alone. By the time the eve of our anniversary arrived, I was no longer acting. The smiles I gave him were real, but not for the reasons he thought. They came from a quiet knowing that the next day, every lie he had ever told would finally crumble beneath the weight of truth. He kissed my forehead before bed. "Tomorrow will be perfect," he said, his tone tender. "Yes," I whispered, watching his eyes close. "It will be." When he drifted into sleep, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying the man who had once been my world. There was no hatred left in me, only the clear, steady awareness of what he was and what I had become. The countdown was over. Justice was waiting, beautiful, merciless, and long overdue. The ballroom at the Four Seasons shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with perfume, laughter, and the murmur of polite conversation. 200 guests, family, friends, colleagues, investors, had come to celebrate what they believed was a milestone of enduring love, our 40th wedding anniversary. I could see the sparkle of champagne flutes, and the flash of camera phones as people smiled in our direction. Connor stood tall beside me, his hand warm against my back, the perfect image of a devoted husband. I wore a red gown that clung to my figure and spilled like liquid silk down to the floor. The color was bold, alive, defiant, nothing like the pale, fragile woman I had been during my illness. My hair had regained its volume, my skin a subtle glow. As I looked at myself reflected in the mirrored walls, I realized that the woman staring back was no longer a survivor. She was a force that had rebuilt herself from ashes. Connor leaned close, whispering, "You look breathtaking, my love. Everyone's talking about how miraculous your recovery is." His tone was tender, almost genuine, but I could sense the arrogance beneath it. He believed he had won. He thought this night would mark the last act before he discarded me and rewrote his life with another woman. I turned my face toward him and smiled sweetly. "Thank you, darling," I said softly. I just wanted tonight to be perfect. The room was alive with music, a string quartet playing something delicate and timeless. Waiters drifted between tables carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. I could hear Eleanor, his mother, telling a group of guests how grateful she was that Connor had stood by me through such a difficult time. I caught her gaze for a moment and offered a smile. She returned it warmly, unaware that by the end of the evening her son's name would never again be spoken with pride. At the head table, my daughter Lisa sat with Jessica, Ruth, and Victoria. They blended in perfectly. No one suspected that the women at that table held the truth that would unravel everything. Victoria looked radiant, yet tense. Her fingers toyed with the stem of her glass. Jessica sat poised and calm, every detail meticulously arranged. Ruth's eyes found mine, offering a small, steady nod. We were ready. Connor tapped his glass with a spoon, signaling the start of his speech. The crowd quieted. He stood in the center of the room, his voice rich and confident. 40 years, he began, his tone heavy with sentiment. 40 years with the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Margaret, you've taught me resilience, patience, and above all, love. Through sickness and health, through every trial, you've stood by me. I only hope I've given you the same devotion. The audience sighed and applauded. My chest tightened as I listened, not from affection, but from disbelief at how effortlessly he could lie. He looked at me then, eyes glistening with rehearsed emotion. "You are my heart," he said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. I rose slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I joined him at the microphone. Applause swelled again. I smiled at the guests, feeling the weight of 200 expectant eyes. "Thank you, darling," I said, placing my hand over his. "That was beautiful, and tonight, I have a surprise for everyone." The room buzzed with curiosity. Connor turned toward me, still smiling, though I noticed the faintest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I stepped aside and lifted my hand slightly, signaling the AV technicians stationed at the back of the room. The lights dimmed. On the enormous screen surrounding the ballroom, a photograph appeared. It was a wedding photo, but not ours. The image showed Connor in a tailored navy suit, holding hands with a woman in a white lace gown. Victoria Weiss. Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave breaking against stone. Connor froze. His face drained of color. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. The slideshow continued. Document after document appeared. Marriage certificates, financial transfers, love letters, text messages. Each piece of evidence unfolded the story of his deception, the second marriage, the secret accounts, the theft. Murmurs filled the air. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering in disbelief. One of Connor's business partners, Harold, rose from his seat. "Connor, what the hell am I looking at?" Connor tried to speak, his words tripping over each other. This is some kind of mistake, a malicious fabrication," I cut him off. "No, it's not," I said clearly. My voice carried icily across the room, calm and unwavering. "Every document you see has been verified by my attorney and law enforcement. For years, Connor has lived a double life, lying to his colleagues, to his family, to his wife. Victoria stood then, her voice trembling but strong. And to me, she said, heads turned toward her. He told me his wife died 3 years ago. The crowd erupted, some gasping, others exclaiming outright. Eleanor sank into her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth. Lisa's eyes glistened with tears, her expression a mixture of rage and pride. Connor's mask cracked completely. He turned toward me, his voice raw. "Margaret, you don't understand what you're doing. You'll destroy everything, our lives, our reputation." I've faced him fully. "You destroyed them yourself," I said. "While I was fighting for my life, you were stealing from me. From my father's legacy. From our daughter's future." The screen shifted again, now showing the evidence of embezzlement, the fraudulent transfers, the hidden accounts. A final image appeared. The trust fund statements bearing both our names, drained to nearly nothing. Silence. Heavy. Stunned. Absolute. Then, slowly, I stepped closer to him. "You thought I was weak," I whispered, though the microphone carried my voice across the room. "Illness didn't break me, Connor. It taught me patience. It taught me how to survive in silence, waiting for the moment when truth could speak louder than fear." He reached out as if to grab my arm, but Lisa was there first, her hand firm on his wrist. "Don't touch her," she said, voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to hurt her anymore." Security approached then, guided by Jessica's quiet signal. Connor tried to protest, shouting that it was all lies, that I'd set him up, but no one listened. Every face in the room had seen enough. As they escorted him out, the murmurs turned to outrage, then applause, soft at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the ballroom. I stood in the center of it all, the red gown catching the light, my heart both heavy and free. The years of pain, of deception, of shrinking into the background, all of it seemed to lift away. I glanced toward Victoria, who met my eyes with a small, tearful smile. We had both been broken by the same man, yet somehow, together, we had reclaimed ourselves. When the applause finally faded, I took a deep breath and spoke once more. "This wasn't about revenge," I said. "It was about truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can set you free." The room erupted again, not in scandal, but in solidarity. I felt Lisa's arm wrap around my shoulders, Ruth's hand slip into mine, and in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of what once was, I felt something new take root inside me, something fierce, alive, and whole. The room remained suspended in silence after the revelation, the air charged with disbelief and heartbreak. I could still hear the echo of the handcuffs as the federal agents stepped closer, their calm, deliberate voices breaking through the murmurs. The lead agent approached Connor, reading him his rights with measured authority. "Connor Wallace," he said evenly, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and bigamy." The words hung in the air like a final verdict, heavy and irrevocable. Connor's face went slack, drained of all color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His once carefully cultivated charm, that polished veneer he wore so well, had shattered completely. He turned toward me, eyes frantic, searching for some trace of the woman who had once forgiven everything. But I was no longer that woman. I simply stood still, my heart steady, my gaze unwavering. He was escorted away between 2 agents, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the doors closed behind him, a wave of emotion swept through the room: shock, pity, and something else. Quiet recognition of truth revealed. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I felt a gentle touch on my arm. When I turned, Eleanor Connor's mother was standing there. Her face, usually composed and proper, was streaked with tears. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Margaret," she whispered, voice breaking, "I am so sorry." Her apology caught me off guard. For years, Eleanor had been distant, polite, but cold, the kind of woman who sent cards instead of visits, who asked about my health, but never stayed long enough to see the truth of it. I should have come more often, she continued. I believed him when he said you needed quiet, that you were too weak for visitors. I thought I was respecting your wishes. I didn't know what he was hiding. I didn't know what he was doing to you. Her regret was raw, unguarded, and it broke something in me I hadn't realized was still fragile. I took her hand and squeezed it gently. You couldn't have known, I said softly. He deceived everyone, even those closest to him. Her tears fell freely now. You didn't deserve any of this, she whispered. And neither did that little girl. We stood like that for a long moment, two women linked by pain, loss, and the betrayal of the same man. Then she stepped back, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and gave me a look filled with both sorrow and admiration. You are stronger than I ever imagined, Margaret. Before I could answer, a group of Connor's business partners approached. Their expressions were a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Harold, the senior partner, extended his hand. Mrs. Wallace, he said, his tone heavy with sincerity, I owe you an apology and our thanks. If you hadn't exposed him tonight, we might have lost everything. He had us all fooled. I took his hand. He fooled me too, I said quietly. But sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see what was real. Another partner nodded, his voice gruff. You saved more than you know. You saved us from ruin. Their gratitude filled me with something warm but bittersweet. I hadn't set out to save anyone. I had only wanted the truth. Yet in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my life, but prevented more lives from being destroyed. As they moved away, Victoria stepped forward. The crowd seemed to part naturally around her, as though giving space to a moment that belonged to both of us. She approached with her head held high, her daughter Emma sleeping on her shoulder now. The chaos of the night too heavy for small eyes to bear. When our eyes met, neither of us spoke for a moment. There were no enemies here, no rivalry, just two women who had been living in different chapters of the same cruel story. Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. We both deserved better, she said. And you survived so much more than anyone should have to. Her words touched something deep in me. I felt the tears rise, unbidden this time, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of release. I reached for her hand and we stood there, two survivors in the wreckage of his lies, sharing a quiet strength. You and Emma will be all right, I said. You have a future without him now. That's something he can't steal. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. So do you. Before I could respond, Jessica, ever composed yet glowing with satisfaction, approached holding a stack of documents. Margaret, she said, her tone both professional and tender, I just got confirmation from the federal team and the courts. You've recovered all your inheritance. Plus, they've approved damages for emotional distress. Her smile widened just slightly. It's over. Legally, financially, completely over. For a second, the world blurred, the lights, the people, the music that had long since stopped playing. I could barely take it in. All the years of illness, manipulation, confusion, the slow erosion of dignity, it all seemed to lift at once as though the universe had finally drawn a full breath and exhaled for me. The room erupted into applause. At first it startled me, the sound sharp and sudden in the still air. But then it grew, swelling into a wave of warmth that surrounded me. People stood, clapping, cheering, crying. Some embraced each other. Some simply watched with awe. I stood tall in the center of it all, no longer the quiet, sick wife who had been pitied and hidden away. I was visible, fully, undeniably alive. Lisa pushed through the crowd, her eyes red but shining. She threw her arms around me, holding on tightly as though she could anchor herself to this new reality. Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. "You're the strongest person I know." I held her close, resting my forehead against hers. "I wasn't always strong," I admitted. "But I learned. Pain teaches you how to stand when you think you can't." She pulled back, tears streaking her cheeks, and smiled. "You did more than stand. You fought. You won." For a moment, the noise faded, and all I could feel was the stillness inside me, the kind that comes after a long, hard storm. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly. It was peace, a quiet understanding that justice had been done, and that I had found my voice again. Around me, laughter began to return, hesitant at first, then genuine. The guests started to mingle, whispering words of admiration and shock. Some came to me with kind words, others simply nodded in respect. I didn't need their approval anymore, but I accepted their warmth like sunlight after years of cold. Across the room, Victoria stood near the exit, rocking her daughter gently. When she caught my eye, she smiled again and mouthed a single word: freedom. I smiled back, feeling it settle deep in my chest. Freedom, yes. That was exactly what this was. As the night wound down and the last of the guests departed, I stood alone for a moment beneath the chandeliers, the red gown glowing in the dim light. My reflection in the mirrored wall no longer looked fragile. She looked whole. Everything Connor had taken, my trust, my health, my sense of worth, I had reclaimed, piece by piece, through truth and courage. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I no longer feared it. Because now, finally, I was walking it on my own terms. The room remained suspended in silence after the revelation, the air charged with disbelief and heartbreak. I could still hear the echo of the handcuffs as the federal agents stepped closer, their calm, deliberate voices breaking through the murmurs. The lead agent approached Connor, reading him his rights with measured authority. "Connor Wallace," he said evenly, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and bigamy." The words hung in the air like a final verdict, heavy and irrevocable. Connor's face went slack, drained of all color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His once carefully cultivated charm, that polished veneer he wore so well, had shattered completely. He turned toward me, eyes frantic, searching for some trace of the woman who had once forgiven everything. But I was no longer that woman. I simply stood still, my heart steady, my gaze unwavering. He was escorted away between two agents, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the doors closed behind him, a wave of emotion swept through the room: shock, pity, and something else. Quiet recognition of truth revealed. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I felt a gentle touch on my arm. When I turned, Eleanor Connor's mother was standing there. Her face, usually composed and proper, was streaked with tears. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Margaret," she whispered, voice breaking, "I am so sorry." Her apology caught me off guard. For years, Eleanor had been distant, polite, but cold, the kind of woman who sent cards instead of visits, who asked about my health, but never stayed long enough to see the truth of it. "I should have come more often," she continued. "I believed him when he said you needed quiet, that you were too weak for visitors. I thought I was respecting your wishes. I didn't know what he was hiding. I didn't know what he was doing to you." Her regret was raw, unguarded, and it broke something in me I hadn't realized was still fragile. I took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You couldn't have known," I said softly. "He deceived everyone, even those closest to him." Her tears fell freely now. "You didn't deserve any of this," she whispered. "And neither did that little girl." We stood like that for a long moment, two women linked by pain, loss, and the betrayal of the same man. Then she stepped back, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and gave me a look filled with both sorrow and admiration. "You are stronger than I ever imagined, Margaret." Before I could answer, a group of Connor's business partners approached. Their expressions were a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Harold, the senior partner, extended his hand. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, his tone heavy with sincerity, "I owe you an apology and our thanks. If you hadn't exposed him tonight, we might have lost everything. He had us all fooled." I took his hand. "He fooled me too," I said quietly. "But sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see what was real." Another partner nodded, his voice gruff. "You saved more than you know. You saved us from ruin." Their gratitude filled me with something warm but bittersweet. I hadn't set out to save anyone. I had only wanted the truth. Yet in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my life, but prevented more lives from being destroyed. As they moved away, Victoria stepped forward. The crowd seemed to part naturally around her, as though giving space to a moment that belonged to both of us. She approached with her head held high, her daughter Emma sleeping on her shoulder now. The chaos of the night too heavy for small eyes to bear. When our eyes met, neither of us spoke for a moment. There were no enemies here, no rivalry, just two women who had been living in different chapters of the same cruel story. Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "We both deserved better," she said. "And you survived so much more than anyone should have to." Her words touched something deep in me. I felt the tears rise, unbidden this time, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of release. I reached for her hand and we stood there, two survivors in the wreckage of his lies, sharing a quiet strength. "You and Emma will be all right," I said. "You have a future without him now. That's something he can't steal." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "So do you." Before I could respond, Jessica, ever composed yet glowing with satisfaction, approached holding a stack of documents. "Margaret," she said, her tone both professional and tender, "I just got confirmation from the federal team and the courts. You've recovered all your inheritance. Plus, they've approved damages for emotional distress." Her smile widened just slightly. "It's over. Legally, financially, completely over." For a second, the world blurred, the lights, the people, the music that had long since stopped playing. I could barely take it in. All the years of illness, manipulation, confusion, the slow erosion of dignity, it all seemed to lift at once, as though the universe had finally drawn a full breath and exhaled for me. The room erupted into applause. At first it startled me, the sound sharp and sudden in the still air. But then it grew, swelling into a wave of warmth that surrounded me. People stood, clapping, cheering, crying. Some embraced each other. Some simply watched with awe. I stood tall in the center of it all, no longer the quiet, sick wife who had been pitied and hidden away. I was visible, fully, undeniably alive. Lisa pushed through the crowd, her eyes red but shining. She threw her arms around me, holding on tightly as though she could anchor herself to this new reality. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with pride, "you're the strongest person I know." I held her close, resting my forehead against hers. I wasn't always strong, I admitted. But I learned. Pain teaches you how to stand when you think you can't. She pulled back, tears streaking her cheeks, and smiled. "You did more than stand. You fought. You won." For a moment, the noise faded, and all I could feel was the stillness inside me, the kind that comes after a long, hard storm. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly. It was peace, a quiet understanding that justice had been done, and that I had found my voice again. Around me, laughter began to return, hesitant at first, then genuine. The guests started to mingle, whispering words of admiration and shock. Some came to me with kind words, others simply nodded in respect. I didn't need their approval anymore, but I accepted their warmth like sunlight after years of cold. Across the room, Victoria stood near the exit, rocking her daughter gently. When she caught my eye, she smiled again and mouthed a single word: freedom. I smiled back, feeling it settle deep in my chest. Freedom, yes. That was exactly what this was. As the night wound down and the last of the guests departed, I stood alone for a moment beneath the chandeliers, the red gown glowing in the dim light. My reflection in the mirrored wall no longer looked fragile. She looked whole. Everything Connor had taken, my trust, my health, my sense of worth, I had reclaimed, piece by piece, through truth and courage. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I no longer feared it. Because now, finally, I was walking it on my own terms. 6 months had passed since that night at the Four Seasons, yet sometimes I still woke with my heart racing, as if the echoes of applause and betrayal still lived in the corners of my dreams. But when I opened my eyes now, the air felt different, lighter. My mornings began with sunlight pouring through sheer curtains, the scent of coffee filling the kitchen, and the quiet hum of a life finally at peace. I had learned that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, in the way you breathe without fear, in the way laughter slowly returns, in the way silence no longer feels like punishment. 6 months ago, I thought the end of my marriage would also be the end of me. Instead, it became the beginning of something larger. The foundation came to life from the ashes of that story. It started as a small idea written in the margins of my journal. Help women like me, those silenced by dependence, illness, or love that turned into control. What began as a whisper grew into a mission. Today, the Margaret Wallace Foundation for Financial Independence occupied a bright, sunlit floor in an old building downtown. Every morning, I walked through its glass doors and saw women waiting, some trembling, some defiant, all carrying stories etched into their eyes. We offered them financial literacy, legal aid, and emotional counseling. But more than that, we offered them something far rarer, the belief that it wasn't too late to reclaim their lives. Victoria sat across from me in the office we now shared, surrounded by case files, stacks of paperwork, and a watercolor painting of wildflowers I had made myself. Her once polished, guarded expression had softened. She wore less makeup these days and laughed more easily. "Do you ever stop to think how strange this is?" she asked one afternoon, smiling as she signed a stack of documents. 6 months ago, we were 2 women broken by the same man. And now? I looked at her and finished her sentence softly. Now we're building something that could save others from becoming who we once were. Little Emma came running down the hallway, her small feet pattering against the hardwood floor. "Grandma," she called, clutching a crayon drawing in her hand. She had started calling me that without hesitation, and every time the word filled me with warmth I hadn't known I needed. "Grandma, look! I drew you and Mommy." I bent down, admiring the drawing, a stick figure version of Victoria and me, holding hands beneath a big yellow sun. My eyes stung as I hugged her. "It's perfect, sweetheart," I whispered. Victoria smiled softly. "She's found a piece of family again," she said. "We both have." News occasionally reached us about Connor. He had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. His name, once respected in business circles, had vanished from every partnership, every publication, every event. The empire he'd built on deceit had collapsed entirely. I didn't feel joy when I thought of it, only a quiet acceptance. Justice had already been served where it mattered most, within me. Life had taken on new shades of color, quite literally. After years of illness and turmoil, I returned to painting. At first, my hands were unsure, my strokes hesitant, but soon the rhythm returned. The canvas became my confession, my prayer, my proof that beauty could still be born from pain. When the local gallery offered me a chance to exhibit my work, I hesitated. It felt too vulnerable, too exposed. But Ruth insisted. "You've spent your life hiding behind someone else's shadow," she told me. "Now it's time to let the world see your light." The night of the opening, the gallery was warm and glowing, filled with the scent of lilies and soft music. My paintings lined the walls, abstract bursts of color that captured emotion more than form, the deep blues of despair, the golds of resilience, the red of renewal. Each piece told a story my words could not. Ruth stood by my side, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You did this," she said proudly. Jessica and Sarah arrived soon after, their faces bright with excitement. "You've come full circle," Jessica said. "From victim to advocate, from pain to creation." I smiled, feeling tears sting the back of my eyes. "It doesn't feel like a circle," I said softly. "More like a new path." As the evening went on, people moved slowly through the gallery, studying the paintings, asking questions. Then, near the end of the night, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 30, her head wrapped in a silk scarf that revealed she was recovering from chemotherapy. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Mrs. Margaret?" she asked. "I hope it's okay that I came. I heard about your story through the foundation." "Of course," I said, smiling gently. "I'm glad you did." She hesitated, then continued, her eyes glistening. "Your story, it gave me courage. My husband controlled everything, my finances, my treatments, even who could visit me. I thought I couldn't survive without him. But then I read about what you went through, and I realized I could leave. I could start over." Her words hit me like a soft wave, both humbling and healing. I reached out and took her hand. "You did the hardest part," I said. "You believed that you were worth saving." She nodded, tears spilling over. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me it's possible." When she left, I stood still for a moment, surrounded by my paintings, my friends, and the faint hum of life moving forward. I realized then what I had been searching for all along, not revenge, not vindication, but meaning. All that pain had shaped me into someone new. Illness hadn't broken me, it had slowed me down long enough to see who I really was. Betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had burned away everything false, leaving only what was real. Through the fight for justice, I had found purpose. Through loss, I had found freedom. I looked around the gallery, the laughter, the light, the people who had become my family, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. When I returned home that night, the moonlight fell across my desk, where an unfinished canvas waited. I picked up a brush and began to paint again, this time without thought, without fear. The colors flowed effortlessly, soft gold, pale pink, deep indigo-ish stroke, a promise to myself that life, even after ruin, could be beautiful again. As the first light of dawn began to touch the sky, I stepped back to look at what I had created. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, alive with imperfection, alive with hope. And I smiled, realizing that somewhere along this long, winding road, I had stopped surviving and started living. If my story has touched you, if you believe in second chances and the strength that rises after heartbreak, I invite you to subscribe to the channel to walk with me through more stories of resilience, courage, and rebirth. Because sometimes the end of one life is only the beginning of another.